what's hard about the first 50 miles of Dirty Kanza is you're in a group of 50 guys and women. You're surrounded by folks all around you, and it's really difficult to drink.
That was this week's guest, Scott Witthoff, two-time age group winner at Dirty Kanza, talking about the first 50 miles of DK 200. This week we talk about West Coast versus Midwest gravel. And as always, we'll talk about a few more events that you should have on your gravel riding bucket list.
Welcome to The Gravel Ride, your go-to podcast about the people, places, and products that define gravel cycling. Here's your host, Craig Dalton.
Welcome to the pod, Scott. I really appreciate you making the time to come talk to us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, so I know you from just general San Francisco cycling and mainly like that epic ride you do on Saturdays. But could you tell me a little bit about your background as a cyclist?
So I'm born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska. In high school, I had some classmates that I really looked up to. They race every Saturday, and they'd come to class on Monday morning showing off their $80, $100 cash winnings. I was like, what is that? What do you get that for? And they were big bike racers. So I got started when I was probably 16 years old.
That's a long journey in the sport.
Yeah. And then I slowly kind of discovered that I wasn't a great cyclist. I was just average, and I wasn't meant to be a bike racer. And I was on a cross-country and track team. So picked up swimming, and I turned into a little triathlete. Hate to say it, but that's sort of where my early days of cycling, I was kind of a triathlete.
We won't shame you for that.
Yeah.
So then, onto the subject of gravel riding, it sounds like from talking to you earlier that you discovered riding on dirt quite early just by nature of the terrain that was around your home.
Yeah, I felt like I lived out in the country in Lincoln, lived on a small lake. In the winter months, the group of guys I would ride with, we would spend a lot of time riding gravel roads. We would just head out and ride 20 miles, maybe 30 miles straight into a headwind, and then turn around and ride back. That's kind of what you do in the Midwest. Wherever the wind's out of, you ride straight into that headwind and then have a tailwind coming back.
And were you just riding your regular road bike out on those roads?
In the winter, we try to ride our road bikes as much as possible, and then we slowly started riding our mountain bikes. That was more... that's fast forwarding a little bit. That was around 1987. I got my first mountain bike, and I loved riding gravel on my mountain bike. So that was, but up until 87, I only rode my road bike on the gravel.
Okay.
Also, Lincoln has really hard packed gravel, so it's pretty fast and it's not too loose. Different states like Kansas, you need to be on like more of a mountain bike or a gravel bike.
Gotcha. Now, you've been living out in the Bay Area for a while, and obviously like the gravel racing and riding scene has really become popular over the last, let's call it 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Were there elements of the equipment that you saw evolve that really made it come back into your life in earnest?
I feel like last weekend was the Grasshopper, old Kaz, which you were there, and we had a blast. Like, it was an absolute blast. Racing that years ago with cantilever brakes. If it's muddy or, I don't know, it just feel like disc brakes have really changed. The ability to run a fatter tire nowadays on these gravel bikes is wonderful. Being able to put a 40 millimeter tire on your bike is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I'm excited to talk to you because you're one of the few guys I know who has experienced Midwest gravel riding and gravel riding here in Marin County in Northern California. So I'm curious to explore that a little bit, and maybe one way to do that is to talk about your experience at Dirty Kanza, because you're, I guess, a 3-time veteran of that event and 2-time age group winner. So I think your insights are going to be really fascinating on that.
First off, that's an amazing race. It's truly a community when you go back there. I look forward to going back to see friends and see a lot of the Bay Area people that travel all the way to Kansas. So you seem so out of place when you step off a plane and going to Emporia, Kansas, you're like, holy cow, look at all these people from all over the U.S.
What inspired you to do it for the first time 3 years ago?
There are some folks, some guys that I used to ride with in Lincoln, Nebraska that have been doing it. One guy, he's done 10 of them. I've always wanted to go do it, but I've been so intimidated by that distance.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your head around 200 miles. Once you do it, it turns out it's not as hard to wrap your head around once you complete your first one.
Yeah, for me, it's given the type of terrain we have out here in Marin County, which is a lot of ups and downs in a sustained fashion. So you're climbing 800 feet or 1,000 feet. To translate that to more the rolling hills in the Midwest, it is a bit of a disconnect on how you train for it. Can you talk a little bit how you trained for it and how you got your head around it and how that actually translated when you were on the dirt?
I think, I did a lot of Saturday and Sunday, big blocks of training. And I don't like to call it training. I grab a group of friends and we go out and we do a big Saturday ride on pavement, and then maybe Sunday follow it up with another big day, maybe 2 really big 6-hour days on the bike. You need to do some training off-road just to get your upper body used to all the abuse that it will take, because it's pounding on the handlebars.
Yeah, over a 200-mile day, it's got to be a lot of abuse. Is it different that it's sort of smaller rolling hills and then the sustained descending that we do out here?
I feel like what's hard about the first 50 miles of Dirty Kanza is you're in a group of 50 guys and women. You're surrounded by folks all around you, and it's really difficult to drink, to hydrate. So I think a Camelback is a must.
And did you figure that out on the first go round, or did it take to the second?
No, I'm a huge sweater. I cramp pretty easily. If I don't have a Camelback, I'll be in big trouble. But the first 50 miles, you're not really taking your hands off the bars a whole lot. And then once it kind of spreads out, then you can once you're kind of in your little group, then you're able to eat and drink and gather yourself a little bit.
Yeah. And I was surprised to learn that there was a lot of flats at Dirty Kanza. What element of the terrain creates that?
The Flint Hills of Kansas are those razor sharp rocks you see so many flat tires. Those first 50 miles, you're also in a big group, so you might not be taking the best line. You might have to follow somebody, and sometimes I find myself trying to drift back a little bit to give myself some space, because I've learned the hard way, just flatting a lot. It seems like I get a lot of flats.
Right.
And I've kind of had to learn the hard way. I've got to drift back a little bit and have a good side of line, so I can see what I'm about to run into.
Yeah. What kind of equipment were you riding?
I'm a big fan of the Specialized Trigger tubeless.
Okay.
It's a 38 millimeter tire, which has good sidewall protection.
And does it have a knob on it?
Yeah, it does. It has a great file tread, perfect for Kanza.
Okay.
I feel like everybody's making a great tread. It's just how good is the sidewall protection? A lot of tires out there just don't have a good sidewall casing.
Right. It sounds like that's a good investment if you're going to go tackle Dirty Kanza.
Yeah, it's a heavy tire. It's really heavy, but I think it's worth having a little bit higher volume tire.
Yeah.
And that offers a little bit more sidewall protection.
So it sounds like a couple takeaways are consider Camelback for hydration, just so you can stay hydrated during the first 50 miles and obviously later in the day as it adds up. Great tires with good sidewalls.
Yep.
Because the last thing you want to do is make a long day even longer with a couple flats. And then just getting out there and putting the mileage on however you can in your local terrain.
I feel like I have 3 bladders waiting for me at each rest stop. There's only 3 rest stops over the 200 miles. I roll in the feed zone and I'll quickly swap out one bladder and put in a fresh one.
Was that a neutral area that they just transported your gear bag and you found your number and you grabbed it, or did you actually have friends out there helping you?
Everybody needs to have their own support crew, or you can do a for hire crew, which I've done the last 3 years. It's a local It's like $75. And it's wonderful. I've highly recommend it. They're the first, you go through the timing mat and they're the first group waiting for you, like big purple chamois butter tent. So you can find your crew quickly, and then they have your bag laying out for you.
That's amazing.
They call it in and they're like, here comes, Scott Witthoff, and they've got your bag waiting for you.
I guess that comes with being a 12-year-old event versus, many of the events we're riding these days are 1 or 2 years old.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of sort of the Ironman experience, where it's just a little bit more dialed to get you through the end of what is inevitably going to be an epic day. I mean, we're talking about, a 13-hour day, which is far beyond what most of us usually ride.
I would gladly open a couple more rest stops along the way. I find myself stuck in between, usually the second and the third, totally dehydrated, no water. One year I had to pull off a group that I was in, ride up to a farmhouse and ask for some water
Wow.
That got me to the third checkpoint.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about all these gravel events is they're going in multiple different directions. Like something like Dirty Kanza, which has obviously been around for a long time, is an ultra endurance race, which is different than, the 4-hour races of the Grasshopper series or Gravel Mob or things like that. Yeah. And that's what I find really interesting about the sport in general, is that things are going in multiple different directions. And, I, for one, as I mentioned to you earlier, like I love the idea that the festival atmosphere of these events. And I hope, regardless of how many fast people come on the front, that spirit of adventure and that sort of community persists throughout these events.
The one thing I really love about Dirty Kanza, the entire town of Emporia, they come out for it, and they have all these tents and pop-up food vendors, and it's neat to see all the winners. They come back out and they cheer people on till midnight. I mean, it's a party, music going, and I just think that's wonderful. That it's neat to see the winners that come back down and cheer every last finisher. Yeah,
those guys have put together such an incredible event, and I think, for those of us who may not have spent a lot of time in Kansas, to be able to go and participate in an event that has such a legacy in the sport and see how it's done right and see how the community comes behind it, I think it's like a great model for, some of the newer events to aspire to.
Yeah. And Europe is now taking note of what Dirty Kanza has done, and they're putting on races over in Europe now.
Is that right?
Based on the formula that works for Dirty Kanza. Like, what is it that makes a great race? And I think we're seeing that everywhere. People are putting on amazing races.
Yeah. Are there some other events that you've done in the past or hope to do in the future that you're excited about?
I was signed up for Rebecca's Private Idaho last year. Everyone says, I've never heard one negative thing about that event. Rebecca does an amazing job putting on a neat race, and I signed up for it. So
for this year?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm excited. Grinduro up in Quincy is another incredible event.
And what did you think about that format? So for those of you guys who don't know, with Grinduro, they had 4 timed segments. So essentially you can ride as slow or fast as you want in between those segments, but the only timing that counts is in those segments. Do you like that format?
Yeah, I liked it because you grab a group of friends and you ride pretty chill, and then it's all bets are off. You go for it and you try to smash one another up some time segment. I usually get dropped pretty much in the parking lot. I'm already off the back early on that first hill climb, but you get an opportunity later to shine, maybe on a descent, maybe on the flat TT. There's 4 different types. Oh, and the last one's the single track.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of fun.
It made for some interesting sort of decisions about equipment, because each one of those sections could have taken something different.
Yeah. I think, if I had a lot of bikes at my disposal, I would choose a hardtail on that course, because that last single track those guys on mountain bikes had a blast.
Yeah, it's funny. I was riding with a mutual friend of ours, David Belden, and we came to the same conclusion. Our hardtail mountain bike overall would have been a faster vehicle to cover the terrain. Although we both agreed like being on gravel bikes was a fun part of the experience.
Sure.
So we'll see next year if I go hardtail mountain bike or stick on the gravel bike. Finally, I wanted to talk about an event that you put on and that has a really great history, the Coast Ride. While it's not a gravel event, it certainly classifies as adventurous cycling. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of the Coast Ride and really what it is for people who aren't familiar with it?
The Coast Ride, everybody asks, well, where did it start? And I honestly feel like it's been happening for as long as I've been alive. It just, everybody rides to San Francisco. The old days, they rode San Francisco to Santa Barbara, to San Diego. Greg LeMond, there's stories of Greg LeMond riding with his dad down the coast. And I think he called it the Coast Ride. But there are a bunch of triathletes, I want to say around early 90s, that started it. They started here in San Francisco and they rode down to San Diego. And that was kind of their kickoff to the year. And I started joining them 15 years ago, where we would all carry a backpack. That's how we got down the coast. We would carry backpacks, and some years it was raining and some years were beautiful. Then in 2005, I wasn't able to ride it, so I drove my car. I wanted to be a part of it. So I drove. It started raining, and everybody said, "Hey, Scott, do you mind if I put my backpack in your car?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. So I carried about 20 bags, and that was the end of self-supported. I ruined it for everybody. Now, so ever since 2005, now we've had SAG support. We only ride to Santa Barbara. It's a 3-day bike ride, but each day's about 125 miles. And we stay in hotels along the way."
Yeah, well, it was my first version. I finally got to go on it this year. I loved it. I'd ridden the coast before by myself or with friends, and there is something liberating about just heading south and riding all day long. And the camaraderie and just the basic organization that you've been able to kind of cobble together with the other people involved has been really great for the cycling community. I mean, obviously, I know dozens of people who every year it's on their calendar to do. So,
it's a neat, what I love about it too is it really brings groups of people together. This is a no frills bike ride. Like we have pizza at the end of the day, some SAG stops, but it's really you're just responsible for getting yourself down the coast, and we'll take your bags. And the whole goal is just, I love seeing people meet other fellow cyclists. We had a couple get engaged a couple of years ago, which is pretty wonderful. Yeah. Like that they pulled over and proposed to his wife. So that was pretty neat.
That's great. And there's a website. It's the coastride.org, right?
Correct.
Yeah. For those of you who want to check it out, definitely take a look. There's some great pictures there. Talks about the route. I mean, obviously you can go out there and do it on your own with a backpack, as Scott said, but if it makes sense in your January training plan, definitely come out there and check that out, because the Highway 1 down the coast, it can't be beat. It's a world-class place to ride your bike.
Yeah, we're truly lucky where we live to get, and we've had some wet years. People have done those, are scarred. They won't come back to the Coast Ride because it's 3 very long days in the saddle. But if you have good weather like we've had the last few years, it's pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott, I appreciate the time today. It was great to learn a little bit more about your background and Midwest gravel riding. I think it's very illustrative as listeners start to explore, like, where should I go? What should I put on my bucket list of gravel riding? I think you gave us a few good options. I'll put links to all the events that you mentioned in the podcast. And if you're comfortable, I'll put a link to your Strava profile if people want to check out where you've been riding.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll also post, if you could send over one of your favorite gravel routes on Strava.
Absolutely.
I'll post that as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Craig.
Absolutely. It was great to talk to Scott this week and learn a little bit more about Dirty Kanza and the Coast Ride and some of the other events he's participated in. I'll post notes to everything we talked about in the show notes. And as always, if you have any questions or suggestions, follow us on Instagram at The Gravel Ride or shoot me a note at craig@thegravelride.bike.